All right, Bonnie, you're clear. We're on air.
Okay. John, you want to go ahead and call the meeting?
I hereby call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. First order of business introductions. My name's John Saw. I'm the outgoing chairman. Have the rest of the citizen members?
Kaylee Nance, citizen member.
I'm Leslie Schachner, citizen member.
Michael Osborne,
citizen member.
Michael Osborne, citizen member.
Vote the councilors now.
Mark Gamba, Mayor.
Angel Falconer, counselor.
As an Nicodemus, counselor.
Lisa Beatty, counselor.
And finally, our esteemed staff.
I'm Bonnie Dennis, finance director.
Peter Passarelli, Public Works Director.
Counselor, would you like to say hello? Yes, Council President Kathy Heisey, apologies for being late. And City Manager Ann Ober. Keith?
Oh, I'm sorry. Keith McClung, Assistant Finance Director. Can only do 3 things at once.
And Judy Serio, accountant.
Next order of business, approval of minutes. I'll entertain a motion to
So moved.
August 30th meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the meeting of August 30th, 2021. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. It's the time of the meeting for public comments. We'll open it up to anyone in the community who wants to comment. Are there anyone present who wants to comment on, speak to the budget committee?
I don't see anybody present.
All right. I'll call on Ann Ober for the city manager update.
Thank you, John. A few things worth noting tonight. The first is that we are now we're starting as staff to prepare the budget. So we are looking at how our expenses have been going for the last year and a half. I do just want to point out a couple of things that you're going to talk about tonight so that you have some context. The first is that our safe projects have been happening and they are about to have some amazing ribbon cuttings, I believe on November 20th. So the Lake Road project is complete. Linwood is about to be complete. River was completed this year. 42nd and 43rd are now out to bid. I believe we've received the bidder and we are working with them on construction for next year. So the safe projects are actually moving along great. Inflation is real. I just want to point that out as we're looking at what's coming in our next budget cycle. That's going to influence some of our safe projects, is my guess. It's also something that we're cognizant of as we're working on the City Hall project. We are going to start doing some design work on the new City Hall starting this winter, in part because we need the buying capacity in the bond to actually do the improvements to the building. We're a little concerned about what our buying power will be with the money that we allocated when we pulled the bond debt. So we're going to try and do some of the design work early. Before we pass that by, I want to thank our engineering staff for the exceptional work this year. By the way, they really have just pulled an incredible amount of work together, and I deeply appreciate it. Inflation and also just some of the impacts to the economy have affected affected a few of our projects. Peter's on here tonight and can answer any questions about our well, but we did have some significant issues getting our pump for, I believe, well 2. So we're just trying to move as quickly and efficiently as possible, and hopefully things will continue to run on track. But John, I'm in part saying all this because we had a conversation a couple of years ago about making sure that we were expending our CIP dollars. And this is one of those places where I think we've done a great job on it this year, but inflation and buying capacity are going to be an issue going into the next budget cycle. What other big projects do we have coming up? The library is open and doing exceptional work. It's been really fun having the building actually open for the last few months and seeing people in and pulling their books. It's been great to have the building available for the public since we were really only fully open for 2 months before COVID hit. I know that the library staff are excited to be there with everyone. If you haven't had a chance, please go in and visit. It's absolutely stunning, and I continue to be amazed. We were on the cover, I believe, of a library architectural journal this last week. We also won a regional award for the architectural firms for the library this past year. So it's a stunningly beautiful building, and I'm so excited about it. Let's see, the Blue Ribbon Committee for the old City Hall is complete. We are going to be proceeding with a modified either sale or lease of City Hall. One of the things that came from the community is that the trees are really important and the grounds are really important. So making sure that we can continue to protect those is something that we've decided is critical importance for the project. So we're trying to figure out ways to protect the facade, but also allow for a new use of the old City Hall moving into the future. I think those are just a few smatterings of what's been going on for our team. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like me to talk about?
Just a quick question, and this may be prying too much, but do we track how many of the city of employees have been vaccinated?
We do track how many of them have been vaccinated, and we seem to be running on par with where the region is for city staff. Different departments are more or less vaccinated depending on the service area. That's also consistent with other cities. I will say that inside buildings, we saw a higher uptick in the number of people who chose to vaccinate. And we are waiting on what the impact will be for the new OSHA laws coming from the state and from the federal government. We are an organization over 100, but we are also considered public. So there's been some question about its impact. We just need more information. We'll know more by the time, probably 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to follow up on that question. I mean, I know pre-vaccination availability, we had some COVID cases. Have we had COVID cases since the vaccine rollout in the spring?
We have, but we haven't seen transfers inside of the city. So we haven't seen one of our employees getting someone else who works here sick. People have all caught COVID from community locations, not from the city. So we have had a few, to be honest, where I expected us to be 18 months ago, 20 months ago. It's been far better than I had originally feared. But it doesn't mean that we have been unscathed. We definitely have some employees who have been deeply impacted by COVID.
If there's no more questions, we'll move on to the election of a new budget committee chair. Nominations for a non-council budget committee member to serve as budget committee chair will now open up for nominations.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Does the new nominee have to take over this meeting, or are you going to finish running this meeting, Mr. Stoll? Oh, if you answered that, we didn't hear it.
Yeah, right. I kind of got thrown to the sharks when I took it over, but I'd be happy to continue on to the end of the meeting.
Okay. I mean, it seems kind of fair to, I was a little surprised this wasn't at an agenda item at the end of the meeting, I guess. Well, I'd like to nominate Leslie Schochner if she's interested in serving. Leslie's definitely somebody who digs deep into the budget and pays a lot of attention, and I think she'd be a good chair. I mean, I think any of our budget committee members would be a fine chair. So I don't want to preclude other people who might want to put their name in, but I thought I would nominate Leslie.
I would like to second that. This is Leslie's second rodeo on being on the budget committee. She was for years before as well. She's got deep experience with the city of Milwaukee's budget and does always dig deeply and understand it. And if she doesn't, she helps the rest of us understand the parts that are hard to understand. So.
Bonnie, do we do this separate for the chair and the vice chair, or do we do it combined?
We do this, actually, typically we do this combined, but this is off the cycle. So we were going to just do the chair for this evening.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded for Leslie Schochner to become the budget committee chair. Any discussion?
Well, I would like to say something, which is that I would be honored to do it. Although I have to say, I feel like I am not up to speed on my meeting protocols. I'll probably have to do a little homework in between. And I also would like to say that if there's somebody that really would rather do it, I hold no pride forward. I'm perfectly willing to defer to somebody that has a burning desire to do it. But otherwise, I would be glad to serve in that role.
Well, and I will note that, it may be that Leslie serves a year or two and somebody else who's newer to the committee wants to step forward too. So, I mean, we don't think of this as a forever kind of a thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess when I thought about it, because Lisa broached the idea to me, and I had not considered it. It seems to me like being on the budget committee can be an important precursor to moving into other roles in the city. And I certainly don't want to take that away from any of the younger members of the committee that might be looking at it that way. But I would be glad to do it for a while. So thank you very much.
Any more discussion? Let's put it to vote. All in favor of having Leslie Schochner become our next budget committee chairman? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Now go for the vice chair, or not worry about that?
No, I didn't put it on the agenda for the vice chair. We could do that at the next meeting, though. Typically we do these at the beginning of the budget presentation meetings. So, but if you want to change the agenda, you definitely can. But I believe right now, Lisa. Okay.
So we're going to talk about the annual Moody's comment.
Yeah. So in the packet, I prepared, or I submitted in there the Moody's report. The Moody's report is something that we receive annually through the rating agency, which is Moody's. Typically, we receive the credit rating every year when we go out for a bond, but on off bond years, we get this annual report. So I don't believe we've actually shared this report in recent years, mostly because we have been going through debt and issuing debt. And the last credit rating we received was on the full faith and credit last year when we went for the City Hall purchase. But this year we're not issuing debt. And so we received this credit rating, which is a AA2 rating. This rating is a high quality rating, meaning that we have the best ability to repay back our debt, and it communicates to investors that we have a high credit score. So similarly to the credit score that you receive on your personal credit, there's a high, medium, and low score. This is actually considered a high score. It's not the highest score. The highest score is a AAA rating, which is very difficult to get, but it's definitely nowhere near the worst score. We're in that high bucket, or like in the mid-range of that high bucket. The lowest score is a C, which basically communicates to investors that there's very little chance of recovering their principal or interest, and we would be considered exceptionally risky. So we're very proud of our credit rating. The lowest I think we've ever had in Milwaukie that I have found was an AA3. So to have an AA2 in the last probably the last 10 years or so has been a wonderful achievement. But so generally this report is an extremely positive report, and I wanted to definitely share with everybody the good news that we had. And I see that Anne's got something to fill in.
That was awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to explain that when we asked what it would take for us to get the next highest rating, they said you'd have to get a lot bigger. So this isn't one of those things where we could simply change our budgeting process or our spending habits. This is something that would literally require us to be a much bigger city for us to get any higher than we are today.
Well, and I thought it was really interesting to read, so I would definitely encourage you to give it to us every year.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an interesting read. It's encouraging, and congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. We definitely work really hard to make sure we get that credit rating up, or at least sustain it. So, yeah.
I actually have a couple of questions. I haven't ever seen this report either, and I found it really interesting. And so one of the questions that I have is, if you look at a number of the rows that are calculating like net direct debt to operating revenues, or available fund balance as a % of operating revenues, in previous years, they were much higher than they are in this year. And I'm wondering if that's due to the fact that we had funds because of capital projects. I mean, what would cause that?
Well, we've gone out for more debt. So the 21 million on the transportation bond is part of that. And did
I guess maybe this, I don't need to use the time of the budget committee, but I would like to understand why there are such variances. And then the second question that I had was, when it talks about the available fund balance, is that the beginning balance for each of those years? Is that what that is? If you look at the debt and financial data at that box at the bottom, it's population, and this is available fund balance. Is that the beginning balance of the budget? Is that what they're using, of the general fund budget?
No, they look at our actual financial statements. So when we went through this process, they get an estimated financial statement. So that would be the ending fund balance that's available at the time that they did the report, which I believe this was back in August is when they actually talked to us about. So there's a lot of things that do change.
Oh, so it's an interim fund balance based on when it's calculated.
Yeah, it's an estimate. So actually, you'll see that the population is in 2020 it says 21,009, but it's actually more like 20,600. something. So there's some variances, but this is just an estimate. If it was way off the charts, then that would affect our credit rating, but it's all relatively in the same bucket.
Yeah, I just was interested where the available fund balance figure came from, and you're saying it's based on the financial statement of the month in which they're doing the calculation. Am I right?
It's based off of the end of the fiscal year financial
Okay.
statements. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the variances is so 2020. We're working on our 2021. So actually, I think 2020 was correct. There's another estimate in here that they looked off of the 2021 financials that we had to give them estimates for.
Okay. Okay. It's a general question. I'm not picking at the numbers. I just wondered where they came from. Thank you.
Sure, no, it's a good question. All right. Any other questions on the report?
All right, we're ready for Bonnie to kick us off into our next budget cycle, 23-24.
Okay, give me one moment. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, does everybody see my presentation screen without the notes? Okay, so, all right, so this kicks off our budget presentation. So we are now officially in budget season. So this presentation has a lot to cover. We're gonna go over our the internal budget process of what we do generally, and this will give you a broader idea of how we prepare the budget. We're also going to go over our key budget items. So there's a lot of components that go into the actual budget presentation or the budget document itself. So we're going to look at the budget as the document, the 5-year forecast, the capital improvement plan, and then also the master fee schedule. And what that means is the compilation of when we actually get through the budget. We are also going to look at the timeline, and I got a couple of questions for everyone within the timeline, and as well as the due dates that we have set aside for actually completing the budget. And then I'm going to go over the OpenGov platform that we purchased this last year to help us with the budget process that was adopted in the last budget cycle. Okay, so internally, but also with everybody here, this is our first set of processes that we go through for the budget. We start with kickoff. So we actually just did our kickoff meeting a couple of weeks ago with all the departments. They received the templates and some general training for the OpenGov system, and they received this similar presentation for the budget cycle. Within this next month or two, we're going to work on more of the OpenGov trainings, and everybody's received a training, but this is more in depth, and we also had those trainings a while ago. So this is just the beginning stages of our process to prepare the budget. Then we go into the department preparation stage. Departments are already working on their budgets. They've been working on the budgets for a very long time, but this is, and it's ongoing, it's never really ending. But this is the stage where we are looking at our expense tables and revenue projections for the next 2 fiscal years, and also potentially for the next 5 years. Departments are going to work with finance to pull the reports and data out of our encode system for ERP. And really refine the numbers and put it all together to balance out their department budgets. And then kind of in conjunction, but mostly after everyone's prepared their department budgets, we go through a write-up stage, which is basically where departments complete their narratives. They have key performance indicators that they need to report on, and they really go through and talk about their accomplishments for the last couple of years and then their goals for the next coming years. So this section is that narrative piece that you see in the beginning of the department pages of the budget book. And it's also what drives the conversation when we have the presentation meetings at the budget meetings. Then we go into more of a formalized process for finance and city manager review. So all the departments will present their budgets to Anne for review and ultimately for approval before we take that back to the budget committee for the presentations and hopefully approval of the budget to the city council, which leads into the next section, which is delivery. And so that's where department directors will present the budgets that they prepared to the budget committee. Okay, so the key budget items that we have that really pull everything together is the budget document itself. We also have the capital improvement plan, the 5-year forecast, and the master fee schedule. So there's several layers that go into each one of those, but I'm going to give you a general overview of each of these documents. So we're going to start with the budget document, which is ultimately the key document that we use mainly going forward, along with several other documents. But this is one of the key ones. It includes the budget message, and the budget message. The budget message is prepared by Anne, and Anne is the budget officer for the city. It's a really in-depth message. It talks about where we're at today, what the goals are for the city. It talks about our financial projections in there and gives an overview. So there's a lot of detail that goes into that budget message. And that's the first meeting that we have with budget committee, is when Anne presents that budget message to the budget committee. Then we have in the document itself, we go over a city overview, which really talks about the history, the demographics of the city. It then goes into budget process, the philosophy, and then the goals that were set aside by city council goals. The next section we talk about is trends, and the trends are financial trends throughout the city. So how are we doing and where we expect to go? This is where you see a lot of those graphs that talk about, where we are with revenue in the last 5 years, how we've either increased or decreased it. There's some comparative information to other jurisdictions in there as well. But it's a pretty detailed section, and it really encompasses the budget as a whole, and it talks about where we project ourselves in the future. And then we move into the financial policies, and this is an important section because it really speaks to how the city is committed to the financial management of the city and how the city complies with laws and regulations, and its directives around the fiscal management. So, for example, the city complies with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. There's a set of policies surrounded around that. We also have policies around city code, what authority council and budget officer has. And then it's just overall a crucial part of the budget, as it really tells us what we can and can't do with our financials. The next section we have is the transfer schedule, and the transfer schedule is based off of activity-based costing method. So basically the transfers is where all of our internal services. So for example, the human resources manages over 145 employees throughout the city. The departments that are not within the general fund pay into the general fund to help afford the costs associated with managing human resources. So that is basically what the transfer schedule does. It's a very similar method that other cities locally also use to account for internal service functions. Okay, and the next section that we have is the budgets, and the budgets are split into both the overview with the fund itself, and then also it digs deeper into the actual departments. So for example, the general fund has multiple departments. So we'll have an overview for the fund, and then we also have the overview for each individual department, including those narratives and key performance indicators. So the last few sections in the budget document is the 5-year forecast and the capital improvement plan, which I will go over separately. And then we have a really good section for the glossary that has a lot of the definitions around what, you know, what GAP stands for and what other information within the budget book has. So it's a very good tool to use along with the budget. And then we have the appendix section, which includes in the final budget document, it'll include the resolution that was adopted by budget or by city council. It'll include the postings that we did for public notification. And a lot of the reasons why we include that information in the budget book itself is because when we're going through the audit process, the auditors always ask for that information. It is public record anyway, so we include it in as the appendix for the budget because it's all part of the entire package. It's all part of that process when we go through the budget. And then the very last section is the urban renewal area budget, the Milwaukie Redevelopment Commission. And the reason why that is completely separated out of the total citywide budget is because it is considered its own separate agency, its own entity. So we, by law, have to include that in its own separate section. It could have its own separate report, but it's nice to have everything in that one document. And it'll include similar things like it'll include the budget message. It includes its own 5-year forecast. It includes its own appendix section as well. So that is the budgets document as a whole. I know that we've all been through this last budget cycle, but I was hoping that we can get just another overview as we move into the budget again. But is there any questions on the budget document? Okay. Okay, so next we're going to move into the capital improvement plan. And the capital improvement plan is another document that includes a message from the city manager, from Ann. It includes an introduction, and then it includes tables and information that summarizes all the capital improvements throughout the city and what is forecast for the next 6 years. So the current sections are infrastructure, operation, facilities and equipment, community development, and then we have a section in there for unfunded. And again, we have an appendix which includes things like the glossary and some other key information that's needed. But the capital improvement plan just generally is, and you'll see this later in the presentation, but we're going to go over all the CIP projects in February when we meet again. But this capital improvement plan is really a driving force for a lot of the funds and a lot of the departments, and how we balance the budget and make sure that we have those projects in place. And then we look at things whether or not we need funding, or if we need to look at other projects because there's not enough money, or if we want to add things to it. So there's a lot of information that goes in this capital improvement plan that really drive into the total budget for each fund. Okay, next we have is the 5-year forecast. So the 5-year forecast is actually located more in the back of the book, but it is actually one of the first steps that we look at when we're looking at our long-term planning and our long-range planning. So it's essential because it looks at where we may be at the end of the biennium, whether we're in a large deficit or if we're in a surplus, or mostly where we're looking at in our 5 years. So typically we see our budgets in a deficit situation, and so we have to plan for that, where we need to make sure that we are looking at today, so that when we are looking 3 years down the road, if we're looking at a large deficit, how are we going to plan for that? So this 5-year forecast really looks at that long range planning. It does take into account the past fiscal years. It looks at our current fiscal year, and then the next 5 years. And it really helps when we look at that we look at just making sure that we're balanced as a city, where we're at city policy levels, and we just work together with departments and just try to make sure that we find a balance between how much we're looking at in the future and what we can do for today.
I have a question.
Okay.
In preparing the forecast, is it just sort of a statistical projection, or are there adjustments made based on sort of internal knowledge? I'm thinking about the projection of revenues. Is that just a straight line projection, or is there some methodology to adjust for increased building based on what's been seen in the recent past?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have to say it's all of the above, actually. When we look at the 5-year forecast and we look at specific revenue line items, some of them are based off of previous and historical data. Some of it we do look at, like, for example, the building fund. We will take a look at where major projects are for building generally, and I know, and Peter could also speak to this in the utility funds, because we have a forecast that in the utility funds that we do go through to help project those out. So it's a combination of both. We look at previous, we look at areas where we might see things in the future that we know of. Some of it is just a straight line. Personal projections for one. I know it's on the expense side, but we do talk about where we stand at 3%, or or if we know benefits are going to go up. So, and I see Peter popped in. So, Peter, do you want to add to that?
Sure, I can add a little bit on the projection side as it relates to the utilities. Some of the things that we take a look at too are, the assumptions that we make for those revenue projections as they relate to consumption behavior and the effects of weather. And we sort of try to look at what our historical consumption has been, as well as how we see sometimes we see changes based off of weather impacts. The drier summers, we generally trend with higher water usage, right? People tend to water more in the summer when it's really dry. So, we try to take a look at those and see if we can make assumptions based on some of the weather forecasts on what we can expect, since it helps us sort of give us a range to anticipate where those consumption projections are going to turn out. One of the things that we've noticed on water over the last decade or so really is a reduction in water usage with residential customers as people install more water efficient fixtures, appliances, dishwashers, washing machines, they tend to use much less water, and we've seen that in our consumption data as it relates to residential customers.
Okay. Okay, Lisa's got a question.
Yeah. So, I mean, then I know there's, people and organizations that do, economic forecasting. So I'm sure you do some amount of consulting those kind of sources, but it sounds like we don't, that this forecast is really done by staff and it's not something we're like contracting out to do. So do we ever go back and look at one from 5 years ago or 6 years ago and see how we did? Do we ever check?
I actually have not done that by checking 5 years ago. I've definitely looked at where we're at today, and I will look at what we did project out for last budget cycle. But I have not gone back through and did a full review of the past 5 or 6 years and see where we've landed.
If I can add on the utility side, when we do a rate study, when we did our last rate study in 2000, was it 19? I think 18 or 19 when we did a rate study, the consultant certainly took a look at those projections that we had made in the past and how they played out, and he tried to true those things up as they develop the new rates. For example, one of the things that I've looked at over the last budget cycle has been, we made some projections based off of COVID that we thought we were going to see a significant decrease in revenue within our utilities. And in fact, what we saw was an increase in consumption because, more people being at home during the year, working from home, we saw an increase in residential consumption. So, those certainly play an important factor in when we're developing those projections, but they get smoothed out when you average those in, right?
Okay. All right, thanks, Peter. Any other questions on the 5-year forecast? Okay, the next item I want to talk about is the master fee schedule. The budget committee actually has not had a lot of time with the master fee schedule. What happens is, well, not what happens, but what the master fee schedule is actually a list of all the fees that we have throughout the city. So that's anything from our utility rates, but also to things like how much it costs for somebody at the library to get a printed copy or a colored copy. So it encompasses all of the rates that we have throughout the city. So this is a 2-year fee schedule. The fee schedule is mainly managed by Keith McClung. He's the assistant finance director. But he will take this information, work with departments, work with Peter, for example, on determining the utility rates and bring in the historical data together. So there's a lot of information that goes in this fee schedule. This fee schedule will then go to a work session with the city council members and be discussed there at the work session, and then it will be brought forward as part of the budget. So even though the fees are not listed in the budget document itself, but a lot of those fees drive those revenue projections that you'll see in the budget document as well. Okay, so the next section I'd like to talk about is just general timeline. This is actually the presentation that I gave to the departments. So under the timeline, we are doing our kickoff meetings now. the trainings and the kickoff meetings for both OpenGov. We look at the capital improvement plan, and we've already had another separate kickoff meeting for that. And we do the OpenGov trainings and so forth. And then we move into the preparation phase, which is between now and February. And all through that, we go through all those steps that I just identified a moment ago. We really look at where our budgetary constraints are. We look at our forecast. Then we also look at just generally where our goals are by department. And then we prepare for the budget committee CIP presentation that's in February. And then we go through what I established kind of an acceptance phase, and that's where we have completed all of our budget templates in-house. We've completed our documents, and we balanced, and that's when the budget message also gets drafted. And then we present all this, the proposed budget, to the budget committee, and we do all of our presentations in April in preparation for hopefully, if the budget committee approves the proposed budget, then that budget will go over to City Council for final adoption in June. Sounds all familiar, I'm sure. It feels like just yesterday we went through all this.
Hey, Bonnie, can I ask a question just for anyone who might be watching? So the opportunities for public input on the budget process would be February and April and June. Is that correct?
Right. So February is really more of a presentation of the capital improvement plan. So not really a, I mean, obviously any public can speak to the capital improvement plan at that point, but the actual public opinion and comment section is really in April and in June when we have the actual budget meetings, budget committee meetings related to the budget in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so key budget dates. So February 28th will be our next budget committee meeting. It is on a Monday night again, but this will be a joint budget committee meeting and our Citizens Utility Advisory Board meeting. So Peter will be joining us again for that meeting. And then we should have some members of engineering as well to join us to talk about the capital improvement plan. And then on April 5th is the master fee schedule discussion with City Council. So that will be at a work session. And that's when Keith will present the master fee schedule, and departments are also going to do their presentations as well. And so it's April 30th, May 7th, and May 14th are all Saturdays. And those are what I am proposing for the budget committee meetings. If you recall, we did our meetings last budget cycle on Saturdays. There were half days, 8 to noon, I think. It seemed to work out really well. I'm hoping that the committee would consider to do Saturdays again. I don't know if we'll be in person or online, but I wanted to get feedback today on Saturdays if this is something that everybody would be okay with, or would you like me to move to more of a Monday night schedule where we go from basically 5:30 at night, and I've been in them that they've been until about 10 o'clock at night. So I'm opening up the floor to get feedback.
Well, I'm fine with the Saturday meetings. I will accommodate other people that probably have busier schedules than me, but Saturday works fine for me.
Okay.
Well, we no longer have Wilda with us, but I will speak up in favor of Saturdays as preferable to another late night meeting myself.
Well, and I will say I'm okay with Saturdays. I'm not so okay with 8 a.m. 8 a.m. is
Agreed.
I don't even start work on weekdays by 8 a.m. So to me, that's a little bit too early, but
That's
Saturday
fair.
is okay at 9 or later.
Okay, that is definitely fair. I will agree with you there on that one. We'll, how about 9 o'clock? Maybe 9 o'clock meeting would be good. Okay. Okay. All right. If anybody else has any concerns, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and plan on those dates, Saturdays, 9 a.m. For all the budget committee meetings. So the first one will be on April 30th, and we will go over the budget message. And then there'll be some other key things that we'll go over at that time. I believe we talk about the state shared revenues. We will also talk about the CIP. I think we talk at that point, and then we also will go over the current quarterly at that meeting as well. And then on May 7th and May 14th, or excuse me, May 7th, we will go over the department presentations. So that day is going to be probably the most lengthy day that we have. And then May 14th, if we're not done on May 7th, we will continue forward on just the agenda of department presentations and hopefully the approval of the budget at that time. If not, we will we can do that on May 7th and then cancel May 14th, or we can do May 7th and May 14th, just depending on what we talk about at that time. And then that does leave us some room to add an extra day before city council meeting if we need to. So the next date would be June 7th, and that is the city council meeting where we actually will do a budget adoption. So the public hearings that Councilor Heisey was talking about will happen mostly on those April 30th, May 7th, May 14th, and on June 7th. Okay, so so that goes over the key budget items and the dates. I want to talk a little bit about OpenGov because OpenGov, we've talked about it in previous meetings. We went forward with a as a finance department, we went to the budget committee last budget cycle to get an adoption of a budget tool. So, and throughout this last budget cycle, we did a process where we looked at various different budget tools, and OpenGov was the one that stood out to us. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it includes the workflow. So it has an approval process. So departments will be able to put in their budget. They will be able to submit it to finance for review. And then there's a couple other layers, which I'll show here just a moment, of those approval processes before it gets to Ian for review. And then also when we finalize the budget in total. The nice thing about OpenGov, it also tracks all the changes. So if a department finds something that they wanted to change in the middle of the cycle, they got a new quote or there was a new projection that they had and they wanted to get it in there, it will show that, but it will also show you what was done before, and it will have all that laid out for individuals who may, 2 years time might want to come back and see, hey, what happened then? So that's a really great part of this tool. The other piece that we found very difficult when we were looking for different budget tools was whether or not they did the 2-year biennium or just the 1 year. And a lot of them still are on that 1-year cycle, where OpenGov actually accommodates for 2 years. Generally speaking, though, there's still a hybrid between OpenGov and our financials software, which is Encode. And OpenGov will, it talks to Encode, so it automatically will pull in data from Encode so that departments can see real time where they're at in their budget cycle. But when preparing the budget itself, it will still be a hybrid approach between this tool, Encode, and then Excel to get to the correct format that you will actually see in the budget book that we have to abide by for budget law. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I can extrapolate the data out of OpenGov, which is a tool that I didn't have before, and that will feed into those tables that you will see in the actual budget document when we come forward to the budget presentation.
And I seem to remember that this will also make the audit process a little more straightforward, Bonnie. Am I remembering that correctly? In terms of access to the information that they want to review?
It won't give them sample testing and so forth that will be as streamlined for the audit. However, it will give us analytics that will be much more streamlined than us pulling that data from Encode and then putting in Excel and looking at the percentage changes and so forth. So it will give us a high level look at our analytics that we've had over the last year, and it also broadens it out for several years beyond that. So that's going to be a huge benefit for the finance team for the audit.
Yeah, great.
So is the fact that it's a hybrid process a transition, or is it always going to be a hybrid process?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, it's it is a bit of a transition. There is some components of OpenGov where they will work on those tables within, they call it stories, but that's another added layer to the system altogether. And it also doesn't have the same look and feel. I know that they're constantly updating the system. So going through the hybrid approach with the spreadsheets is definitely exporting the data to dump into those spreadsheets are the best approach for now, so that we can make sure that we get our previous 2 years, our current year, and then also what we have proposed in the budget. The other thing to just keep in mind that the final budget document itself, it has to show the 2 years budget, the 2 year actuals, the budget as adopted at the end of the biennium. So it's the budget that we had adopted at the time of adoption, plus any supplementals and budget transfers that were done. And then it shows the current 2 years, and then it shows the projected for the approved budget by budget committee. And then it shows the proposed budget, and then it shows the approved budget, and then it shows the adopted budget. And that's the piece that those are not quite in OpenGov at this particular moment in time. So.
Do you expect that they are going to make modifications to do that? I mean, it seems to me that most of those required elements have been required of municipal budgets for many years. I remember them being required when I worked on a budget, and that was too long ago.
Yeah, I think they're working on it because it is it's an important part of the tool, but the main bulk of what the tool is to do the inputting of the budget in that workflow process. So the stories piece that they are implementing is a whole different side of things, and it's going to take them time to get it up to speed. And to be kind of blunt, the system is not as intuitive or as user friendly as other systems. So it'll take the finance team to really get a good understanding of how those stories work. And we've played around a little bit, but it's another learning curve that the staff would have to go through.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just going to give you just a quick overview of what OpenGov looks like. So this is actually our budget module right now, and you just see a few of the departments there. But it shows how the estimated fiscal year 22 expenses and the estimated 22 revenues will look. It's just a big, gigantic overview. But let me go into a little bit more detail. So when departments actually go into their budget, and I picked on code enforcement, they will see all their account numbers. They will see where their budget adoption is. So for example, if professional services, they had 16,000 adopted in the budget. If they had a budget supplemental or transfer or whatnot, that would show up in that column. It doesn't show it in here, but there's also a current fiscal year columns as well. And then also we have in here where departments will put in their estimated fiscal year 22 budgets, because we already have the actuals for 2021, but we need to know where departments see their estimates at the end of the fiscal year. And then they will put in their estimates for 2023 and 2024. The other thing about the system is that you can itemize things. So if you clicked on the plus sign, departments can put in the detail notes of, for example, dues and subscriptions. I have this employee, it's $500 a year that has this dues. So they can put in that level of detail into each line item, and that will carry forward so that they can always go back and see, oh, well, this is what I had planned on. And this is where they can also will be able to use this as a planning tool, and then also see where they actually land in the actuals. So past that, once all the departments actually puts in their budget, they will then hit that submit button for final review. And so when they hit that button, what happens is it will come into the finance department, and then from the finance department, myself as well as my team will look at what was inputted, ask any questions, and there's a lot of back and forth that we can have within the system. And so then once everything is past that in progress stage, then we will move into the next phase, which is basically in development, and finally into the review phase that I talked about earlier. So once you hit submit, it'll come to finance, and then it comes, and then once we do our review, we'll then go over to, we will do a review with Anne in the system. It'll track all that. So that's the nice part about OpenGov. So it's really in 3 phases. We have the setup phase, which is really going on now, where departments put in everything. We have the development phase, where departments will put in their information, and this is the piece that I'm talking about, where finance will do our overview and review. And then we have our final review phase, which is when we present that over to Anne for review and any questions that she may have through the budget process. Okay, so just to recap, I went over all the main budget documents that really go over that feed into the overall budget. There's a lot more that really does go into that, but these are the main ones. We have our timeline and our schedule figured out. And then finally, I went over a brief overview of OpenGov. Okay, any questions?
It sounds like you're pretty happy with OpenGov.
I do like it. And actually, there's been several, stop sharing here, several departments that have already used OpenGov, that they've been going through the trainings and they've been using it, and they really like it. They really enjoy that they can itemize everything and it's all right there, and it's an easy, I do claim it's kind of a more glorified Excel template, but it's got all that tracking built in behind it, and it's got all that review process and workflow that they've really enjoyed. So I am happy with it. It's a bear, but I do like it.
So I just have one. If you're using OpenGov, ENCODE, and Excel, do you have like safeguards in place to make sure if those 3 systems are talking that all the data is actually making it where it needs to be?
Yes, yeah, definitely. There's a couple. There's definitely I have several check figure calculations built into each one of those. So with OpenGov, the system automatically talks to ENCODE, so I can see right away if there's something off, because I look at ENCODE and I look at OpenGov on a tandem regular basis anyways. but also within the Excel document. There's a lot of check figures that I go through, and then not only do I do that, but also Keith will look through the budget departments. Specifically, we have a due diligence check-in for that. Judy here, she has pieces and parts of it. So there's a lot of checks and balances that we do within the department. Just generally, we do that just to make sure that we are checking ourselves. But there is, with the budget, we do want to make sure that we have all the balances totaled and verified, similar to what we do with the financial audit as well. So we do a lot of checking and double checking. Just like that's half of what we do. So, okay. Okay, well, that is the budget kickoff. Woohoo, we're in budget season. So
Keith is going to lead us through the quarterly report tonight.
Yep, and then we have some time for the quarterly report. So Keith, I'm going to turn over the quarterly report to Keith this evening.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
We don't see you though.
Okay, yeah, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so I apologize. If you guys can hear me, I'm just going to go ahead and proceed, and hopefully the video will kick in. First of all, good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity, the Q1 financial report presentation. If I could direct your guys' attention to page 1, we can walk through some highlights for Q1 for FY22. Please note the audit is still happening as we speak. Right now, we're in week 2, and the auditors are making requests, doing testing. So far, so good. No issues yet. So keep that in mind in terms of when we're comparing anything to Q4, that anything related to 21 is going to be unaudited at this point. The second bullet point, we did receive an LGIP rate reduction, and it went from 0.6 to 0.45. So 15 basis points. It's not a large decline, and we actually did forecast for it. So it is expected. We also received the ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act funds, the first tranche of it anyway, and that's $2.3 million. So we have half of it in so far. And then continuing on with Q4, the theme, we are tracking very well with the gas tax. As of Q1, we've collected, more than 25%. So we're forecasting it to be about $450,000 for the year. Also, the vehicle registration fee, consistent with prior quarter at about $120,000 for the quarter. So those two revenue lines are holding steady. Again, the financials are still in progress. Skipping to page 3 under the property tax section, we can continue to roll this forward for Q1 FY22. It was a great summary from last time, and it really explains how the process works. But for our purposes tonight, just note that we have not received our property taxes, the bulk of them, which we typically receive in November. We haven't received them yet. There's no concern or anything, but just in terms of tonight, we have not received. Continuing on page 5, under the franchise fees, we had quite a significant development happen this last quarter. Comcast notified the city that it will not be paying the franchise fees associated with the 7% tied to the broadband services that they provide. So this is a $60,000 a quarter payment. Comcast basically sent us a formal notice in writing, and we also met with their person who deals with compliance with the cities. And basically they paid us through September 30th of this year. They will not be collecting from the city of Milwaukie citizens that broadband fee that appears on your Comcast bill. sure some of you have seen it. It's basically titled Milwaukie right-of-way tax, and it's roughly $5 to $7 per customer. So they will not be billing for that, collecting it, and subsequently not remitting it to us. From an annual perspective, it's about $250,000. This year, we will have the 1 quarter. So this year, it'll probably be about $180,000 to $190,000 impact. So they did cite, some case law, and it's still kind of in process as well with the city of Beaverton. But Comcast has drawn the line in the sand and taken a pretty hard stance. Any questions on property taxes or franchise fees at this point?
Don't we expect other carriers will follow Comcast? I mean, isn't that ruling going to affect phone and other carriers too?
Yeah, Comcast cited specifically though broadband services. There's 5 cities total who collected this fee. But yes, we can probably expect that. Not as material though as Comcast. Comcast is the heavy hitter. I don't have any numbers on kind of the other outside of Comcast who's paying that 7% off. I don't.
So we were charging that for them to use our right-of-way for their infrastructure.
Correct.
So they are no longer paying to use our right-of-way for their infrastructure.
For the 7% for the broadband piece. They're still going to pay the cable franchise and that piece of it. They're still paying that. But basically they're not paying just that 7% for the internet services, which is what the city of Beaverton and Comcast are dueling at now. So it's definitely a step in the wrong direction in terms of extracting more or going after additional revenue at this point. We are waiting on Comcast and the city of Beaverton's lawsuit. Again, it's extended as far as them being issued a decision.
Are we aiding Beaverton in any way in that lawsuit?
Not at this time.
Well, I mean, it does seem like the 5 or 7 cities or whatever might have an interest in kind of banding together and helping out. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I do know that this is on LOC, League of Oregon Cities radar. I don't know any details, but they are certainly aware of the situation, and I assume that they're up to something, I would hope. The staff person I spoke to about it certainly was not pleased with the situation and knows it's of concern.
Can somebody explain what the end of the stay is going to result in? Have all the arguments been made and they're just considering a ruling, or is there more information that's going to be presented to the court? What's happening, I guess, is my question.
As far as details, let's say I don't have anything other than the judge's order to stay until the following year. I believe it's in January sometime. I don't know what other evidence or what other arguments are going to be made at this point.
Okay.
Are you saying a stay of that litigation? You sent us a decision or a cite to a decision couple months ago that was not out of Oregon. It was out of Illinois or somewhere. Is that what you're talking about being stayed, or is there some actual litigation in Oregon?
Yeah, so the city of Beaverton is suing Comcast.
No. Okay.
And so that's where the stay is at. There's no progress there. There was a stay issued in August, and then they extended it into February. January or February, excuse me. Okay, utility fees on page 6. Some good news here. This is one of my favorite topics, kind of shows the health of our accounts receivable aging. And if you remember last quarter, there was some concern with the buckets, the 2, the 3, and the 4-month buckets, and how those had grown substantially from the prior year. And last quarter, we reported about $270,000. That was in the +2 month or greater column. And that's where we kind of draw the line for shut off. But obviously, we still have the moratorium in effect. But the good news here is that the number and the dollar amount has gone down within a matter of 3 months. Our aging overall is higher. It's about 2.5 million. But again, the majority of that bucket is in the current column. So it's really nice to see the 2, 3, and 4 month all kind of decline over past quarter. So it shows that people are starting to pay. It shows that the programs are starting to help. It's allowing us to identify or highlight other specific businesses that we can work with. So we are pushing the assistance programs. We have the low income rates and also the program through St. Vincent de Paul. So there is progress being made. Any questions on utility fees?
I just have a definitional question. In the types of commercial, residential, and multifamily, is the multifamily account a whole apartment house?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, page 7, the staffing levels. This is a continuation from last quarter as well. It just sort of summarizes what's happened. There were a lot of vacant positions as of 6:30 and 9:30. I won't read through them all, but quite a few of them were filled. Is there any questions on any of those? Okay, we can go to page 10. We'll start with the general fund. The first thing I want to point out is a mistake. Don't like doing that, but I will, just because it's going to provide a little bit more context, I think. On the total operating revenue line, in the far right column, it says percentage of flexible budget, and it says 92% on your report. It should be 111%. We are actually tracking, with the ARPA funds received, tracking well above our revenue. Now with that though, there's still some offsets that, some declines, fines and forfeitures, licenses and permits, and also the franchise fees. I'll start with the first one there on the line, the franchise fees. This is just timing. Again, we will see a $60,000 reduction from Comcast, but this is just timing. Outside of Comcast, all of our other franchisees are tracking. So there's no concern on the franchise fee line. Again, on the fines and forfeitures, ticket citations, court citations are turning around. There were quite a few in Q1, much more than Q1 of last year, and also more than Q4 of 2021. So those areas do seem to be picking up. Moving down to expenses, you'll see kind of a theme here. It's either tied to personnel or capital. And so a lot of the underspend, 4.5 million, you'll see is in some of the larger departments. So city manager, community development, facilities, all of those had various underspends or cost reductions throughout the tracking this quarter. Any questions on the general fund? I know there's quite a few notes.
With that error, we will get that corrected before we actually publish this on the internet.
For the City Hall Fund and the Debt Service Fund, there's nothing significant or substantial to report. Payments are being made and tracked. The Building Fund, again, we continue to see increased fees and charges tied to permits and development. Again, the housing boom is still in full effect. Permits are being issued, and it's very, very favorable. Any questions on City Hall, debt service, or the Building Fund?
And just to clarify, the boom that Keith is referring to, it's more of a lot of homeowners are doing new developments, or they're changing. They're doing a lot of renovations, so we're not seeing this big influx of housing per se, but it's definitely a lot of the renovations and fixing things up, or I think there's been several ADUs added. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thanks, Bonnie. Go ahead.
There have been apartment buildings started, right, too, right? I mean, is that somewhere else?
It's actually, so the Monroe Street, I think, is the one that you're referring to, and that is not in this
quarter.
Yeah, that just recently happened, so that won't be in this quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a Q2 event.
Mm-hmm.
What you were saying, Bonnie, kind of goes along with the Affordable Housing or Construction Excise Tax Fund on page 16.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten the question, well, why, if development is so high, why are the incentives and so forth tracking so low or under? And it goes back to what Bonnie just said, in that this is basically being driven by new permits within existing homes, not new homes or existing large developments. So that's kind of why there's no relationship there. Again, nothing substantial to report in the Construction Excise Tax Fund. This is where we did the business relief grants last year, so that's the expense side. Library Fund, happy to report fines and fees, or fines are trending back to normal. For the Biennium, we're just over 10,000, so that's a much needed improvement over where we were prior year. Any questions on affordable housing or the library fund?
I have a question in terms of the, I will admit that I didn't understand the Affordable Housing Fund at all. And thanks to your directing me to the budget, I do have a sense of it. I'm wondering if there is a regular report about what gets funded out of this fund or not. Is that something that is happening, or is it just going to show up in the narrative for the next budget, or what?
Well, there isn't a report that's actually, I take that back. I believe City Council does get a report on a regular basis. I know we've had some new employees in that position, and also we've just recently hired a new community development director. So there isn't a regular report to the budget committee, but I do believe that during the budget cycle that you'll get a lot more information on what's happening in this fund, and just a lot more detail. So if you do want a separate report, I can see if we can look back what was provided to City Council previously, but I don't know. And I'm not sure when that was last done, to be honest.
I'm not talking about creating a new report necessarily, and if there is stuff that comes forward in the budget committee, that, you know, I'm perfectly happy to look at that.
Okay.
I mean, were recommendations made by a group of citizens and, you know, staff. There was a working group that made recommendations on how the CET money is spent. And
Yeah, I did see that in the narrative, but it was very generalized, and so I was just wondering, because there are sort of different categories, how it was actually being allocated out. That's
Leslie, you can expect to see something before council probably in January. So we'll make sure that the entire committee gets the full update in the staff report.
Thank you.
Yep.
There was a footnote on this fund saying it was going to change its name.
It used to be the Affordable Housing Fund, but it was confusing. So we've changed it to the Construction Excise Tax Fund.
That will formally be adopted during the next budget cycle. Okay. I wanted to do a quick time check just in the interest of time because this is running a little bit longer. I know Keith has quite a bit more he wanted to share with the quarterly, but just in the interest of time, is there any questions that anybody has with the quarterly specific? Or Keith, if you wanted to do any more final highlights?
No, transportation fund revenues are tracking, expenses are light in terms of capital expenditure. And then the water fund, wastewater fund, and stormwater fund, all tracking as expected in terms of revenue and expense. So we're good.
I had a question, and I'd raised this with Bonnie before, but and this gets back to, we were talking about revenue forecasting. With the state seeming very interested in moving to road use fees, how's that work into the projections for transportation funding?
Mary, are you talking in reference to electric vehicles and the impact?
And the state's been doing studies on what it would be what the impact for road use charges would be, and for high impact areas and where they could alter it and that. And so obviously it's something they're very interested in moving towards. I can't imagine that it would replace gas tax, but would be offsetting as people move more to electrical vehicles. And so I'm wondering what kind of conversations there are with cities about that and the impact on them for projections.
Council President Heisey is probably the best equipped on this call to take that today. If not, if she'd like to defer, we can bring Kelly Brooks to the next meeting and have her also speak to that issue.
I can give you a real quick answer, which is yes, that's been discussed for years in the state. The point at which legislators are going to take action on changing that, I think, is still a ways off in the future. It's a good question, and I do think it's something we need to be paying attention to, but I think there'll be a pretty good heads up. I would fully expect, unfortunately, because I feel it's short-sighted, but I think the League of Oregon Cities will probably oppose moves depending on how it's played out. But anytime you are changing the way revenue comes into cities, cities tend to be pretty stuck in their ways to some degree. But everyone is very good at acknowledging that the gas tax is steadily going away and there's nothing that's going to change that. What we haven't ever really heard is a united voice that says, and this is how we are going to make up that revenue. So stay tuned. If you've got any great ideas or political.
No, I just know that they did a pretty extensive study.
Yeah.
And had, people involved in it to basically educate and show how what the difference would be between gas, and also it seemed like there was heightened interest recently.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Origo option, where you could basically volunteer for the other way of being taxed, and it's been a good demonstration project, but having it actually lead to legislative action has yet to materialize.
Okay, thank you.
So the other piece to consider on that is if the state does move to some sort of a VMT system, we won't be allowed to follow suit locally. So right now we get funds from the state gas tax, and then we have our own gas tax, right? We passed our gas tax back in the day when a city council could actually do that. If we were to try and do that today, it would have to go to a vote of the people because the law changed between then and now. So the likelihood of us replacing our local gas tax with a VMT is slim.
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay. All right. Take it. I think we're wrapped up on the quarterly. John, if you want to go ahead and.
We have an agenda item for other items or any further items we want to discuss. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
Well, before we do that, I'd just like to thank Mr. Stoll for his years of being our chair. And of course, you're not off the hook. You're still a member of the committee. But thank you for serving as our chair. And with that, I will move to adjourn.
I'll second. Oh,
I also just want to say that he's been the chair since 2013, I believe.
Wow.
So congratulations on a long run.
he needs a button. A commemorative button.
I've enjoyed working with all you people, and it's been moved and second to adjourn this meeting. All in favor? Aye.
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 Motion carries.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie.